I was 40 years old the first time I saw the Sahara, not on a postcard, not from a tour bus window, but with my own eyes, standing at the edge of an endless stretch of sand that swallowed the horizon, barefoot in a place that didn't feel like it belonged to this world. And to be honest, I didn't come for the beauty, or the experience, or the romance of it all. I came because I didn't know what else to do with myself. For months, maybe longer, I'd felt like a ghost in my own life. I had a job that paid well enough but left no trace. I had friends I saw often enough to pretend things were fine. And I had birthdays that passed quietly, each one echoing a little louder than the last, asking, "Is this it?" And I had no good answer. I remember waking up one night at 3:11 a.m., cold, wide-eyed, and unable to remember the last thing that had genuinely moved me. Not a movie, not a person, not even the sound of my own voice. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, then opened my laptop and typed, "Where to go when you feel nothing?" A list of therapy blogs came up, then a travel forum, then a photo. Just a single image. A figure alone on a sand dune, arms loose at their sides, lost in an ocean of gold. The caption read, "The Sahara changes people." That was enough. A week later, I boarded a plane to Casablanca, then a connecting flight to Eritrea, then a 5-hour car ride across flat land that got drier and quieter the farther we drove. My guide Hassan didn't speak unless I asked something. And I didn't. Not for the first hour. Not because I didn't like him, but because I had nothing left to say. We reached Merzuga just before dusk. The village felt like a mirage, dusty houses, low stone walls, a single line of camels standing like statues waiting for someone to remember them. I changed clothes, left everything I owned in a canvas bag in a tiny guest house room, and climbed onto the back of a camel led by Hassan's cousin, Youssef, who didn't speak English but smiled often. Then we rode into silence. The dunes rose like waves frozen mid-motion. The sky changed color behind us, orange, then pink, then a bruised purple that slowly swallowed the sun. By the time we reached camp, the world was blue-black and cold. A few tents, a fire, and the wind. That was it. Dinner was served in the open, chicken tagine, bread baked in the sand, and hot mint tea that steamed in our hands. I ate quietly while the guides talked among themselves in Tamazight. I caught pieces of French, laughter, a soft rhythm of familiarity that reminded me what I didn't have waiting back home. After the plates were cleared, one of the older guides brought out a drum and began to play. Not a performance, just rhythm. A heartbeat in the sand. Hassan clapped softly. Yusuf tapped his knee and hummed. I sat still, watching the fire flicker in their eyes. I wanted to join, to laugh, to feel a part of something, but I didn't know how anymore. Instead, I stood and nodded a quiet goodnight and walked away. I climbed the nearest dune until the firelight was a distant flicker behind me. The sand was cold beneath my feet now. The stars were blinding, more than I'd ever seen in my life. The sky was so full, it felt close enough to touch. I sat. I said nothing. I felt everything. For a while, I just listened to the wind carving its soft path through the sand, to the sound of my own breathing, slower than it had been in months. Then, suddenly, and without warning, I began to cry. Not the kind of cry you do in a bathroom or under a shower where no one hears. Not the polite kind. This was different. This was the breaking of a dam I didn't know I was holding back. It came from somewhere behind my ribs, a sound I hadn't made since I was a child. I cried until I was empty. Then I lay back on the slope of the dune, looking up at the stars, and whispered, "I miss you." I don't know who I was speaking to. Maybe someone I'd lost. Maybe a younger version of myself. Maybe something even bigger. I just knew it was the first true thing I'd said in months. And the desert didn't respond with answers. It just held me. The next morning, I woke in my tent to the smell of smoke and the low murmur of voices. The sun had barely risen. Hassan handed me a tin cup of tea and said, "You walked far last night." I nodded. He studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "That's what the desert is for." I didn't ask what he meant. I just drank the tea and let it warm my hands. Later that day, we broke camp. The sun was high, the dunes brighter than gold. I rode in silence again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, just open. Back in Merzuga, Hassan helped me pack. We shook hands. I said thank you, and meant it more than I knew how to explain. He didn't respond with words, just a hand to his heart, a nod, and a smile that said everything else. That night, back in a real bed in a real room with electric lights and clean sheets, I looked at myself in the mirror, and I didn't see someone fixed. I didn't see someone reborn. I saw someone quieter. Someone who had emptied just enough to let something new in. And maybe, I thought, that was enough for now. I didn't talk much for the rest of the day. After the desert, after the dune, after that night when everything spilled out of me under a sky so full it looked like it was going to burst, I didn't feel like speaking. but not out of sadness. Not anymore. Something had shifted. Subtle, but real. Like when you exhale so deeply your chest sinks a little lower. That's what I felt. Not resolution, not peace, just softness. I stayed in Merzuga one more night. Not in a camp, just a small guest house near the edge of town, where the sand met stone roads and kids kick a soccer ball outside a crumbling courtyard. I watched them from the rooftop, sipping strong coffee as the wind rustled through drying clothes and satellite dishes. The ordinary life of the place grounded me more than I expected. The next morning, I boarded a bus north. I didn't book a hotel. I didn't make a plan. I just wanted to keep moving, not to escape, but to give what I was feeling space to grow. Sometimes healing isn't about stopping. It's about walking slowly enough to notice you're still alive. The road back was long, winding through desert flats and red cliffs that looked like they'd been carved by gods with calloused hands. I saw camels grazing under power lines, a man selling oranges from the trunk of his car, a woman in a pink robe carrying a bundle of firewood bigger than she was. The world kept moving like it always had, but now I was watching. In Miguel, I got off the bus and spent a night in a room with cracked tiles and a view of the hills. I sat on the windowsill with a blanket and let the cold bite at my skin. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't check in. I didn't try to explain where I was. There's something sacred in letting a moment exist just for you. And that night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote. Not for work, not for anyone, just for me. I opened the little notebook I had carried and never used, and I wrote what I remembered. The smell of mint tea in the cold, the drum beat by the fire, the sound I made when I cried alone in the dunes. It didn't come out perfect, but it came out honest. And honest, I was starting to learn, was better than perfect. I made my way to Awarzazate next, where the desert gives way to dry valleys and ochre kasbahs that glow like fire in the afternoon sun. I stayed with a family who rented out 3 rooms and served lentil soup with fresh bread every evening. Their daughter, Layla, must have been no older than 10. She spoke to me in slow, deliberate French, correcting my words without judgment. We laughed over spilled juice and mispronounced vegetables. It felt good to laugh again. One afternoon, her father showed me the old clay fort nearby. As we walked through the narrow alleys, he pointed to the cracks in the walls and said, "We don't fix everything. Sometimes things break, and we live around them." That line stayed with me. I wrote it down that night. We live around the cracks. From Awarzazate, I traveled west to Agadir. The coast, the sea. After weeks of sand and wind and silence, the sound of waves felt new again. The ocean didn't roar here. It whispered. The tide moved in and out with slow, meditative rhythm like breathing. I rented a room just above the beach. Every morning I walked barefoot across the shore while the sun rose behind me, and every night I watched the lights of fishing boats blink gently in the distance, and I thought about how different silence can sound depending on where you are. In the Sahara, silence felt like holding your breath. On the beach, it felt like letting it go. And somewhere in the space between those silences, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not waiting for answers, not for some grand clarity or sign, just being, watching, walking, writing, existing without the constant need to be better. On my final night in Morocco, I returned to Merzuga, not to chase the past, but to say thank you. I wanted to climb that same dune again, not for closure, but as a gesture, a circle closed not with words, but with presence. Hassan greeted me at the edge of town like no time had passed. We shook hands. He didn't ask why I came back. He just nodded and said, "You know the way." I did. I walked alone this time. The sun was setting behind me, and the dunes stretched out in soft shadows. The sand shifted beneath my steps like memory. I reached the top as the sky went from gold to gray. And I stood there. No tears this time. Just wind, just sky. Just the quiet feeling of understanding something I couldn't explain. Then I whispered thank you. To the sand. To the silence. To whatever part of me had decided to live again.